Hi everyone. We'll be going over the multiple choice questions on classes and objects now. I won't be reading the questions, but I'll explain the answers. This one asks, which of the following is a false statement about the methods? Of these answer choices, only D is false, because if you look here, this is a constructor and this is a constructor. There's no third constructor, so this is false, meaning the answer is D. Next question asks, which of the following represents correct implementation code for the constructor with parameters? So when it says the constructor with parameters, it's talking about this constructor here. So if it was correct, it would set each of these values to the instance variables here. And the only one that does this is B. Three asks, which of the following are correct replacements for method body? The answer is C. Replacement 1 is wrong because it doesn't refer to the parameter. And replacement 2 is wrong because the client program, meaning the other class, doesn't have access to that variable. Question 4. Which statement about parameters is false? The answer for this is C. This is because the parameters do not have to be different names to method overload. Instead, they just have to be different variable types or a different number of arguments. Question 5 asks, which of the following correctly constructs a date object in a client class? The answer is B, because based off of this constructor, you need 3 integers, and this one correctly creates D as a new object with that constructor. It's also very important that the keyword new is used and the name of the class is used for the constructor. Question 6 asks, which of the following will cause an error message? The answer is C, because segment 3 will call a null pointer exception. This is because here D is not declared as a full object. So calling a method from that object will cause a null pointer exception. So the answer is C. Number 7 asks, which of the following subsequent code segments will cause an error? The answer is E, because what happens here is it calls for an instance variable from an object in another class, but this instance variable must be private in AP Computer Science. So since the client program doesn't have access to this variable, it will cause an error. Okay, question 8 asks, which of the following could be used as implementation code? The answer would be E, because since this is an instance method, it is allowed to use the instance variables, and it can also use the instance methods in the same class. And this would print the same exact thing as these two, since there is a toString method here, which returns string representation of date as month, day, year, in the same format as the other two lines of code would. So the answer is E. Number 9 says, here's a client program that uses date objects. Which of the following is a correct replacement for code to get birth date? The answer in this case would be A, because here the first segment reads month, day, and year using getters, using user input, and then it would make an object using those three. Segment 2 wouldn't work because month, day, and year are accessors methods that access values that already exist. Segment 3 is wrong because it tries to access private instance variables, which can't be done in a different class than the one with the instance variables. So the answer would be A. A method in a client program for the date class has this declaration. The same method now creates a second date object. Which of the following code segments will not create an exact copy of the object D1? The answer would be A. The first segment does not create an exact copy of D1. Instead, it just refers to the same exact object again. This does not make a duplicate of D1. Instead, it just makes an alternate way to call the same object. So the answer is A. Which of the following will be true after executing this code segment? The answer would be C. This is because of this line of code. Recent date is set equal to null, so recent date becomes a null pointer, and add century does not do anything to recent date. The add century method cannot change the value of the recent date method. A is wrong because to throw a null pointer exception, an instance method or an instance variable must be attempted to be accessed through the null object, but that never happens, so no exception is thrown. And B is wrong because the old date object is changed using this method. 12 says, which of the following methods in the frog class is the best candidate for being a static method? The answer would be B, because swim, eat, get, wait, and die are all values that would differ between the different frog objects, but get pond temperature would be the same for all the frog objects. So B would be the best choice for a static method. 13 asks what output would be produced by this program. A it starts at 6 and B is 3, and then it calls this method with those values. So x is 6 and y is 3, and then 3 is added to 6, so now it's 9 and 3, and now y becomes 9 times 3, so that's 27. So the values would be 9 and 27 for x and y. And then it says system out print line A and B. A and B still stay as 6 and 3 because this does not refer to the original values of A and B. So it'd print this first, which would be 927, and then it would print this 6 and 3. So the answer would be E. Question 14 refers to this, and it asks, the method reduce is not public method because, and the answer would be C. This method is not public because it's only intended for use by the other methods in the class. It's not meant to be used outside of this class, and that for that reason it's only intended for use for the client, so it's not a public method. 15 says the constructors in the rational class allow initialization of rational objects in several different ways. Which of the following will cause an error? The answer would be D. This is because none of the constructors from this class take a double value. The constructors take integer values, or 2 integer values, or no values as a default constructor. For that reason, D will throw an error, because no constructor exists for this type of value. 16 shows the code for the plus method and asks, which of the following is a correct replacement for more code, which goes here. The answer would be E, because a new rational object must be created using numer and denom values. Then it must be reduced. Choice A is incorrect because it doesn't create an object correctly. Choice B creates an object correctly, but not one that's reduced. C reduces it, but not the new object. It does not return a new object. And D reduces incorrectly because it uses reduce as if it was a static method. But reduce is an instance method, so it must use this. 17 says, assume these declarations. Which of the following will cause a compiled time error? The answer is D, because the plus method can only be invoked by objects. Using n here and writing dot plus will cause an error because n is not a rational object. Instead, it's just an integer. So this is not allowed. Question 18 says, a client method contains this code segment. Which statement is true following execution of this statement? Correct answer would be B. This is because only one object is created, and T2 is just set to have the same address, and T3 would just use the same object after this method is ran, and the same for T4. So these all refer to the same object. So any changes made to one of them would refer to all four of them. They're all identical temperatures, and they're in Fahrenheit since this method was ran. Question 19 gives us this code segment and says, which is a correct replacement for a code to construct, which is referring to this. And the answer is C, because 3 is the only one that correctly constructs. This is because here this does not correctly refer to the isValidTemp method, because isValidTemp is a static method, so it must use the name of the class instead of the object. So calling t.isValidTemp is incorrect. And here it does not use any class name to call it, so that is also incorrect. By calling temperature.isValidTemp, you'll get the correct result. So the answer is C. 20 says, which of the following correctly replaces more code so that the post condition is achieved? And the post condition is an equivalent temperature in degrees Fahrenheit has been returned, and the original temperature remains unchanged. The answer for this would be D. This is because both of these correctly change the temperature without changing the original temperature. This would be incorrect because this would change the original degrees of the original object instead of changing the result's degrees. And the result is the new object created. So the answer is D. Question 21 says, if the input for n is 3, what screen output will this program subsequently produce? And n goes in here, so this loop will happen 3 times. And each time it calls the do something method, which creates its own integer count, and it adds 1 to their own integer count. The answer would be A though, because the scope of this only remains within the do something method, and it does not return anything to this method. This count value is not affected by this method, so it prints the same value of 0 each time. Question 22 says, just before exiting this program, what are the object values of x, y, and a respectively? What happens here is that x creates a new object of 7, and y creates a new object of 7, and a is just a duplicate reference to the y object. Since x is using y as a parameter for some method, it takes the value of y, and the value of y is an object, so this also becomes a pointer to the y object, and it adds 1 to the y object, so it becomes 8. And then a does the same thing, but to the x pointer, points to x, but x already points to the y object. So now all three refer to the same object, and it increases by 1 more time until it gets 9. And the values of these would all be the same. That would be a. This question asks, just before the end of execution of this program, what are the values of x, y, and temp respectively? So these values start as x equals 6, y equals 8. And temp does not exist here. Temp only exists here. And what happens here is the values of a and b are switched, but it does not return anything to this segment of code. So just before the end of execution of the program, which means the end of the main method, asks for the values. But here in the main method, none of the values have changed. X has remained the same and y has remained the same. And temp was never declared here. So the answer is C. That ends all the questions for the classes and objects chapter. Thank you for watching.